Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Good to see everyone flowing in for tonight. Our fourth installment of Torah bound and exploration of Pirkei Avot, which is of course part of here at BJ, part of our broader Sinai bound series, as we look deep into the themes of Pirkei Avot in an effort to work towards creating our community covenant at BJ over the coming months. And for our learning tonight, it is such a privilege and a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Joshua Feigelson, who is the executive director of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. He received ordination from Yeshivat Chovevei Torah Rabbinical School in 2005 and served for 6 years as the Hillel Rabbi at Northwestern University, where he also earned a PhD in religious studies. In 2011, he helped found and served as the executive director of Ask Big Questions, which you can see just behind him there, an initiative of Hillel International, which won the inaugural Lippman-Kanfer Prize for Applied Jewish Wisdom. He has also been a consultant and senior fellow at the iCenter for Israel Education, and most recently served as Dean of Students at the University of Chicago Divinity School. He's a Wexner Graduate Fellow and was the founding co-chair of the Wexner Fellowship Alumni Committee. And he graduated with a BA in music from Yale and lives with his wife, Natalie, and their 3 sons in Skokie, where he's joining us from tonight. Rabbi Joshua Feigelson, it is a pleasure to learn from and with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you. And great to be with the BJ community. Great to see John Silver, who's a member of our board at IJS, and to see many more folks. I know some of you are people who come to you might come to our daily sit or do other things with IJS. I will tell you that this session that we're doing tonight is not going to involve meditation and is going to be a little more what we might call straight Torah study based on what Dave told me in preparation, and a chance to do some reflecting with you, hopefully, and some learning with you on a Mishnah that has to do with honor, with kavod and kavod haTorah in particular, honoring the Torah and honoring people. And my hope is that I'm going to give us some places to have some reflection and some conversation through the chat. I know on Zoom it can get a little unwieldy when we start to unmute, and then it gets it can get unwieldy. But we can do some great things through the chat, and I really invite you to be in dialogue with each other and with me, and see what arises for you, what you notice in the course of this study together. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Here it is. Okay, that's the right one. It's a little dangerous sharing your screen on Zoom, as we know. It can be. Everybody can see that? Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, great. And if you'd like to look at this on your own screen, you're welcome to. I will put in the chat, if I can find the chat. Hold on. Now that I did that, it took away my chatting. Here it is. There we go. So this is the link if you want to follow along on your own in Sefaria. So the framing question for tonight is, what does it mean to honor Torah? That's what we're going to be thinking about. But I want to sort of already tip my hand a little bit and say that I think that the Mishnah we're going to be studying, the centerpiece of what we're doing, already signals us that the concept of honor, I think, opens up some really interesting questions about our experience of what we receive and what we give, and how we generate fields of respect, respectability, recognition, Those things all bear, I think, on our concept of honor. And so I think this is a chance for us to think about together, what do we mean by honor? And maybe what would also happen, what happens if the word kavod can also be translated as dignity? And is there any difference in thinking about honor versus dignity? And that's an interesting question as well. So I just want to start though with a chance to think about your own experience, and so reflect on this for a minute. If you think about when, if ever, have you honored someone else? Right? Who was that? For what? For what purpose? Or for what were you honoring them for, I should say? If you can think to bring someone to mind. And I think that could be anything, as there's such a range of what it could mean to honor someone, right? Honoring someone could be my mother drilled into me that I should hold the door for other people when they walk through, when we're going through a door. Very small gesture of honoring, but every time I think of that and I think of her, I think of honoring, in that way. Miriam, thank you, in the chat says honoring people on their birthday, right? We call to wish them a happy, I just had a birthday on Friday. People call to wish you a happy birthday, or John Silver led a sit for IJS on his birthday last week, right? I think which was an honor for him, and it was a chance for us to honor him in a certain way, right? Wonderful, well, thank you. Thanks for the happy birthday. We honor elders, we honor learned people. When the president walks in, you stand up, showing honor. When the Torah walks in, we stand up, right? Showing honor to the Torah, Kvod HaTorah. So that's a way that we honor. And then when have we been honored, right? So we mentioned, birthdays, or, even just in being introduced just now, right, was a form of honor that Dave was extending to me. Wonderful, Bernie, that's a great example. I honored the memory of my grandmother by naming my first daughter after her. Sure, right? Many of us have had that experience of honoring parents or grandparents with names that we give our children. Absolutely, right? We honor people as they're dying in memorial. Wonderful. Yeah, there's wonderful things in the chat here. So it just gets us to start to think about what is what we're talking about with honor, right? And in fact, I was watching President Biden's speech today in Buffalo, and I noted that when the mayor introduced the president, he said, "It's my great honor and privilege to introduce the president of the United States." Right. So in that case, it's not only he's honoring the president, but he's also saying it's an honor to me to be able. Right. There's a halo effect, or a sort of cascading effect of honor. Judah adds, when someone does a Kiddush Hashem, when someone sanctifies the name of God, right? They are honoring God, and in fact, they're maybe magnifying the honor, right? Okay, so this is good. This is an opening sort of calisthenic, get our brains working about this. And we could look at, what does Webster say? So this is copied from online, as you can see, and a bunch of definitions here. That we have a good name or public esteem, reputation, a showing this, we have some, a showing of usually merited respect, recognition, to pay honor to our founder, right? A privilege. I had the honor of joining the captain for dinner. One whose worth brings respect or fame. Or credit, an honor to the profession. Someone is an honor to their family, an honor, or an institution. Okay, Judith, thanks for the clarification. I got it. Okay. Okay, there's some others here. There's a badge or a decoration. I was in the Boy Scouts as a kid, right? And so you get lots of honors. You get different badges, and and that's a form of. And of course, in the Boy Scouts, you also have "on my honor, I will do my best," right? Okay. Really interesting to think about that too. And we've got things, in academic distinction conferred on a superior student. You graduated summa cum laude, right? With honors, with high honors. A course of study for superior students, supplementing or replacing a regular course. You're in the honors class for instance. Okay, so these are all some different definitions. Okay, to get us in the field. All right, so that brings us now to our Mishnah. So here we have Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi said, Kol mechabed et haTorah gufo mechubad al habriot. Rabbi Yossi said, everyone who honors the Torah is themselves honored by others. And the reverse is also true. V'chol hamechalel et haTorah gufo mechulal al habriot. And anyone who desecrates or dishonors the Torah is themselves dishonored by others. Okay, so off the top of our heads, if we don't pay a whole lot of attention to it, when you read through Pirkei Avot quickly on Shabbos afternoon, right, this is a nice little teaching. Great, you should honor the Torah, and if you don't honor the Torah, that's not good, right? Okay, but I think there's more to it potentially. So one question I find myself asking is, when Rabbi Yossi says that one who honors the Torah is honored by others, is he speaking descriptively or prescriptively? Right? That is to say, is he saying that one who honors the Torah is inevitably, ipso facto, honored by others? In honoring the Torah, I am honored by other people. Or is he saying that one who honors the Torah is deserving of honor by others? Right? And is there any difference between those two readings? So I'd invite you to sit with that question. I'd also invite you to think about what are your own questions on this on this Mishnah. Whoever honors the Torah is themselves. I can edit this, so I'm going to make this gender neutral. Themselves, honored by others. And whoever dishonored is themselves dishonored by others. Okay. So, what other questions come to mind for you as you read this? Is there anything that's not clear about this? This is the awkward pause when people type into the chat. I know there's some typing going on. How do we know? Great, Marcia and Bruce, how do we know what is the evidence that one receives honor from others? Great question. Okay, that's great. What is the evidence that one receives honor from others? What does it mean to honor the Torah? Sure, right? That's a basic definition. He's assuming that we know what that means to honor the Torah, but it begs some further definition. Absolutely, Natalie. Thank you. Right? I think there's also a question of what happens when someone who honors the Torah isn't honored by others, like manifestly. What does that do? So what does that mean? Is the honor that, another version of my question might be, is the honor that we sense, the kavod that we sense in honoring the Torah, is that an external thing or an internal thing? Right? How is that experienced? How is it? It's sort of a version of Marcia and Bruce's question. How does that manifested? What's the evidence? How do we see that? What do the commentators in the Talmud say about the meaning of kavod? My version of Pirkei Avot in the Art Scroll doesn't include the commentary. Good. Well, we'll look at that in a second. We'll look at one piece of the commentary from the Rambam, from Maimonides, and then we're going to look at a couple of Talmudic passages as well that help to flesh this out maybe. How do others even know who honors the Torah? Ooh, great question. Right? What happens if you honor the Torah in secret, in private? If you honor the Torah in private, does it count? Really good question. Really good question. There's at my kids' camp years ago, the director did something really smart. He wanted to incentivize kids to pick up trash from around the camp. And so, and they go to Camp Ramah, Wisconsin. And so basically every week in the summer, there's a musical. And before every musical, there's, a whole camp's assembled. And so they came up, they have a whole thing called Alufei HaAshpa, the garbage champions. And if you, I should move this up here. And if you pick up trash during the week, your counselors can nominate you to be an Aluf HaAshpa. And then it's really exciting. Every age group has somebody who gets honored, and the way they get honored is they get a T-shirt that says Alufei HaAshpa, and there's a whole theme song, and the whole camp gets up and dances, and it's really exciting. And it was all creating an honor for people to incentivize them to do good behavior, right? So Sonia points out this seems like a false dichotomy. It seems that one who honors such a sacred document would naturally be one who would live life, i.e. relate with and to others and the world, bringing honor to existence. Maybe who would love life. Yeah, but how could you be one who honors Torah without being an honorable person, right? Is maybe. So that's actually a great question that we're going to come to in a second when we look at one of the Talmudic passages. So let's hold that. So this is great. Great question. So first, someone asked, what do the commentators say? So the Rambam, Maimonides, right, who wrote his commentary on the Mishnah when he was, 17 or 18 years old, in case you were feeling, like an overachiever. Maimonides says, Kvod HaTorah hu b'hora'at hazrizut ba'asiyata v'yechabed ha'chachamim hama'amidim ota b'hasfarim asher chivru ba v'chein chilul HaTorah hefech hashloshtan. Okay, so honoring of the Torah is manifested in teaching alacrity in its performance and honoring the sages that support it and the books that they write about it. So the definition of honoring the Torah according to Maimonides is that if you teach, so first of all, it's about teaching. It's teaching that you should be punctilious and not punctilious, but energetic in performing the mitzvot of the Torah, okay, and honoring the chachamim, honoring the sages who teach it, so honoring teachers of Torah, and the books that they write about it. Parenthetically, such as the book that I'm writing right now, right, according to the Rambam. And the desecration of the Torah then would be the opposite of this. So what strikes me about this commentary, right, about the Rambam is it's very much centered on the teaching and teachers of Torah, right? It is speaking to one who teaches Torah, and it's speaking about the sages who teach Torah and the books that those teachers write, which are teachings of Torah. So it is not so much in holding, if I'm just holding the door for my mother or for one of you, that is not necessarily honoring the Torah. For him, Torah here specifically has a more specific meaning of the discourse of Torah, the discourse of the Jewish people, the text. And the people who teach and compose and contribute to the life of that knowledge. So that might be a narrow definition, we might say. I find that to be kind of a narrow definition, but that's his definition, at least in his youth, of honoring the Torah is centered around the teaching and honoring the text itself. And what the text has to say, okay? But we have other opinions. So this is a wonderful, one of my favorite passages in the Talmud from Masechet Yoma, from the tractate that deals with Yom Kippur. And so we have a teaching of Abaye, one of the great teachers of the Talmud. Abaye said, as it was taught, in another teaching, in a Braita, and you shall love the Lord your God, right? A pasuk we all know. right? You will love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your means. What does that mean? Which means that you shall make the name of heaven beloved. That the name of heaven should become beloved. Interesting that that's the terminology here, beloved, since beloved community through Howard Thurman, Cory Booker today is so such a powerful de jure term. But that heaven should be beloved through you. So our love of God is that we make God beloved in the world. So how does that happen? One should do so in that one should read Torah and learn Mishnah and serve Torah scholars and so far that's all text oriented, like the Rambam, and should be pleasant with people in business interactions. So now we have something behavioral. What do people say about such a person? Fortunate is their parent who taught them Torah. Fortunate is their teacher who taught them Torah. Woe to the people who have not studied Torah. So what's happening here? People are witnessing this wonderful example of somebody who studies and who is living a life of Torah and who is pleasant in their business interactions, right? Who's a mensch. And I kind of hear Abaye also sort of saying, gesturing at, and other stuff. You know a mensch when you see a mensch, right? And what's most important is, what do people say? They say, that's so beautiful. That's someone to emulate. Look at that. Their parents must be so proud of them. Their teachers must be so proud of them. And good job to them for doing such a wonderful, for raising such a wonderful person. And woe to the people who have not studied Torah, meaning that through Torah, by being associated with Torah, this wonderful person is bringing a good name to Torah. Because people see that and they're like, oh, as my friend and colleague Mark Margolius, Rabbi Mark Margolius likes to say, it's like, the example is like the line in When Harry Met Sally, I'll have what she's having, right? You look at that, you're like, I want that life. I want to live a life of Torah. Okay. So-and-so who taught them Torah, see how pleasant are the teacher's ways, how proper are their deeds. The verse states about them and others like them, you are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified. So this doesn't actually use the language of Kvod HaTorah specifically. It comes through, it's cited in another commentary that I was looking at, but it certainly gets at the same idea, right? That Kvod HaTorah here is actually something larger. It's not only in the narrow sense that the Rambam is talking about holding up the text and honoring the text and the writers of the text and the interpreters and the teachers, but it's also having a more expansive notion of being a model, perhaps, right? Being someone who inspires others, someone who through their actions is someone I want to emulate. We all want to emulate. And I wonder, when you think about experiences that you may have had, I mean, by the way, the rest of the passage, I didn't quote the whole passage. The opposite is also true. People who are associated with Torah and then behave like shmendricks, right? That's a Chillul Hashem. That's something that that desecrates and diminishes the divine name. So I wonder, in your experience though, think about maybe, just see if you can tap into, is there someone or a moment where you've witnessed, you've experienced this kind of experience that Abaye is talking about, where you've seen someone who lives a life of Torah and inspires you through that, and you say to yourself internally or maybe externally, wow, like how amazing is that? Right? How amazing is that? And what a bracha that person, that they make me want to be a better Jew. They make me want to deepen my engagement with and life of Torah and life with Torah. Right? I hope that we've all had at least one of those experiences. I've certainly, thank God, I've had many, right? But I think this might get to a larger notion of Kvod HaTorah, is there's a public nature of it, about building a sort of a field, right? Where it's building a field of recognition, that we see something, we recognize in that person, and then we recognize in ourselves an image of what a life of Torah can look like. And if we can upgrade that image, right? We can build an inspiring, uplifting image of that can in fact be a form that's a deep form of honoring Torah, potentially. So that's another image that we get from Yoma. Interestingly, we also have a passage from another part of the Talmud, Masechet Ta'anit, where we have the same Rabbi Yossi. And this is also interesting to consider, because it's not incidental who this character is. He was someone who was known for for embodying these kinds of traits of being very welcoming, and I think a lot like Hillel the Elder, right? Someone who is open and embracing, and with a welcoming sort of disposition. And so Rabbi Yossi here, we have a teaching of his that he says, and this does deal directly with the term kavod. Lo mikomo shel adam mechabdo, ela adam mechabed et mikomo. It is not the place of a person that honors him, rather the person honors their place. Okay, and we might think of makom here as not just a place, but a station, an office, something else, right? But a place, something external to them that they occupy. So for Rabbi Yossi, it is not the place of a person, the makom of a person that honors them, rather the person honors their place. As and his proof text is Mount Sinai. That as long as the Shekhinah rested upon Mount Sinai, the Torah said, neither let the flocks nor the herds feed before the mount. Okay. Once the divine presence departed from the mountain, the Torah said, when the shofar sounds long, they shall come up to the mount. Now, this is a drasha, and you can see the obvious reason why. The first text is from Exodus 34. The second text is from Exodus 19. Disregard that. Just let that. Right now, we're dealing in the realm of like, there's no earlier and later in the Torah. Fine. Okay. So it's all given at once. So once the divine presence departed from the mountain, the Torah said, when the shofar sounds long, they shall come up to the mountain. This indicates that the sanctity was not inherent to the place, but was due to the divine presence resting there. That is, once the divine presence leaves Mount Sinai, the animals and everything else that had been forbidden from coming near the mountain can come back up the mountain. So it's not that Mount Sinai is a holy place, it's that while the Shekhinah is on Mount Sinai, it's holy, right? And so what does Rabbi Yossi learn from this? That it's not, this doesn't just apply to God, it applies to people, right? It's not that the station of a person, is what makes them, what gives them honor. Rather, it's the person that honors this, that honors the place. So we could be talking about a physical place. I think in our lives, we might think about offices that people occupy. Not physical offices, but elected or appointed offices, right? It is not the office that honors the person, but rather the person that honors the office, right? You might say. So I wonder, this is a different teaching, and I want to invite you back into the chat. How does this or the previous teaching illuminate the meaning of our Mishnah at all? If we go back to our Mishnah, scroll back up. Whoever honors the Torah is themselves honored by others. Whoever dishonors the Torah is dishonored by others. So we've looked at two Talmudic passages here. And I wonder if now you're thinking any differently about any insight that you're having about what it means to honor the Torah or to honor a person. And I'll just share that Joyce had messaged, I think just to me, but I think it was intended for everybody. It's interesting that the word kavod is the same as the word koved or kaved, right? As in koved rosh, seriousness, or kvedut, like the heaviness or heavy heart, right? Pharaoh's heart, when it becomes hardened, is described as a lev kaved, right? Which is also interesting. We might come back to that, but I want to invite you to just, now that we've played with this a little bit, and thought about it a little more, invite your reflections. Tony says, seems there is a literal and a metaphorical Torah. Okay. Can you honor one without honoring the other? Okay. concept of the ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, might be applicable here. And certainly for Abaye's teaching, the one from Yoma, it sounds like you can't really do, I don't know if he would say you can't honor the Torah without being an honorable person, but it certainly sounds that way, right?
Rabbi, could I ask a question?
Yes.
We are talking, sorry, but it's easier to do it this way than to type it out. We're talking about performing deeds that honor something or someone in order to get something back. But there's another quote, and more or less it says in Pirkei Avot, where you do something, you don't do something lekabel pras, ela lo lekabel pras, lo al manat lekabel pras. You just do it because you do it, and getting something back and being honored has nothing to do with it.
Good. So first of all, I would say not everybody in Pirkei Avot agrees. And that's the easy out. But it's a great question, Harry. That it is what Rabbi Yossi is describing a reward. That's actually a great question. Is he describing a reward? Like we should be doing this because I want honor? Like I can't imagine he would actually that he would actually say that. I think he would probably agree with the other teaching that you shouldn't do it to be receiving any reward or any honor. Which I think actually that's a wonderful question. It's like, so then what does he mean that people are honored, right? Great question. And I wonder if that question helps us to think about this public dimension, that there's also a piece, it's not just about the private, am I going to get a prize? Am I going to go to heaven, right? And am I going to get a reward for my good behavior? That's not necessarily what this is about. The term kavod, because of its public nature, which we're going to spend a little more time on in a second, it might be about how do we generate a field of respect, a field of dignity, right? Something larger that is, in the context that you're engaging in this in, is, how do we generate a culture where Kvod HaTorah is part of what defines us? I see there's another hand up, and I'm going to say that I don't know how to pronounce your first name. You can tell me, but you can unmute yourself.
It's Mish.
Mish, okay. Hi.
Yeah. Hello. Rhymes with quiche. It's Galatian. But so I think if I go back to you putting forth that it's honoring the place. Sorry, my kid is singing and Ellie is singing. I apologize. If you think about honoring the place, and you think about, or law is a great way, right? So you have the spirit of the law and you have the kind of the law itself. And so I think inherently by honoring the place, you would imbue both the spirit, the metaphorical, and the actual. And I think that my perception is I think actually a little bit more than doing it because you should do it. I think that you approach it with a reverence almost. Because I thought of Rabbi Ferris, who's amazing in the Bay Area, and just and I'm not saying he was always happy or always like, but just really just a reverence of all of the pieces that are a part of the Torah. And I think if you're approaching it that way and you're thinking of how do I present myself in this place, that you're always going to be leading with not yourself, but the wholeness of it. And so I think in that aspect, the reward is get to be in that place of reverence to me. I mean, I think that's kind of my interpretation of it. I think that takes intentionality to always be cognizant of what you are supposed to be illuminating and who, right? Your ego kind of has to step to the side. So that, I think that's my answer.
That's great, and I want, and that's a wonderful preview of another teaching we're going to see in a minute. A Hasidic. We're going to shift gears. I couldn't, and the head of IJS, I couldn't possibly come here without teaching some piece of Hasidut. So we'll look at that in a second. But that's a great beach. That's a wonderful setup for that, right? Because I think I want to take us to a place where I think there's both a public dimension to this, and then there's also a going inside, a deep private piece of it as well. So let's go there. So I wanted to bring into the conversation one of my favorite academic theorists, who's one of the founders of queer theory in literature, Michael Warner. And this is from an essay that he wrote about 20 years ago, actually now, called Publics and Counterpublics. And he says the following. He says, several senses of the noun public tend to be intermixed in usage. People do not always distinguish between the public and a public, although in some contexts this difference can matter a great deal. The public is a kind of social totality. Its most common sense is that of the people in general. It might be the people organized as the nation, the commonwealth, the city, the state, or some other community. It might be very general, as in Christendom or humanity, but in each case, the public as a people is thought to include everyone within the field in question. This sense of totality is brought out in speaking of the public, even though to speak of a national public implies that others exist. There must be as many publics as polities, but whenever one is addressed as the public, the others are assumed not to matter. So that's one level, is like the public. Okay, what if the public finds out? Okay, so that's the public. A public can also be a second thing, a concrete audience, a crowd witnessing itself in visible space, as with a theatrical public, or this group of people who's gathered right now. This is a public. Such a public also has a sense of totality, bounded by the event or by the shared physical space. A performer on stage knows where her public is, how big it is, where its boundaries are, and what the time of its common existence is. A crowd at a sports event, a concert, or a riot might be a bit blurrier around the edges, but still knows itself by knowing where and when it is assembled in common visibility and common action. So that's a public. I will return to both of these senses, he says here, but what I mainly want to clarify in this essay is a third sense of public, the kind of public that comes into being only in relation to texts and their circulation, like the public of this essay, parentheses, nice to have you with us still. The distinctions among these three senses are not always sharp, and not simply the difference between oral and written contexts. When an essay is read aloud as a lecture at a university, for example, the concrete audience of hearers understands itself as standing in for a more indefinite audience of readers. And often when a form of discourse is not addressing an institutional or subcultural audience, a particular audience, such as members of a profession, its audience can understand itself not just as a public, but as the public. In such cases, different senses of audience and circulation are in play at once. And he goes on from there. But what I love about Michael Warner is he calls us to think about what are the different ways, what are the different groups of people, the different publics that we're part of in these different fields that we generate. And the notion, especially in the third one, about texts and their circulation takes us back to the Rambam, right? It takes us back to, right now we are studying Torah. We are part of a public that is studying this particular text, but also Torah, right? Like 3,000 years of beautiful tradition from Moses to Sandy Koufax, to quote the Big Lebowski. So there are all these registers that this works on, and Kvod HaTorah is honoring the Torah. Is, I think, Misha sort of sets us up for this. Is it's encountering that with a sense that I am a custodian of and in dialogue with something much more than just a text, much more than just a group of words on a page or a screen, right? That there is an eternal conversation that's happening here, that I'm stepping into, that we are part of right now. And to honor that, by acknowledging that, that reflects, that immediately binds us up in that. And when we desecrate it, when we don't acknowledge that, we're cutting ourselves off from that. And we're going to see that next in the Hasidic text that we look at. So let's just go. Well, we'll go right in there. So this is from the Avodat Yisrael, who and I feel bad that I didn't look up all of his bio, but this is late 18th century, one of the earlier Hasidic works, if I'm recalling correctly. And he has a direct commentary on our Mishnah, and he reads it in a very different way than well, different but the same, but different than what we've been looking at. So he says the following: the intention with this Mishnah, right, of Kol HaMechaber et HaTorah Gufo Mechubal Al Habriot, etc. The intention here is to say that honoring the Torah is when one realizes that Torah is not an empty vessel, but rather that in every word and letter, and jot and crown, there are mysteries and secrets, that there is meaning in every part. The entire written Torah in our possession is but the body. That is, just as a person has 4 parts, guf, nefesh, ruach, neshama, which are hard to translate, but body, soul, spirit, essence, right? And even a neshama to the neshama, that our souls are linked, our soul is linked up with higher realms of souls up until in Kabbalistic phenomenology, or not phenomenology, but map of the world, that going up to the Ein Sof, to God, the God who is without limit, right? Such that no created being in the universe can comprehend it. So too for the Torah. So we who have neshamot, who have souls, right, and have these depths to us and are created in the image of God, and who have a divine, a spark of divinity within us, and whose souls are linked up all the way into the infinite of the divine itself, so too the Torah has the same thing, right? And the written Torah that we encounter is just a vessel, right, for its own life. This is a text with a life. The crowns and vowels and trope markings are these levels, reaching up to Ein Sof. Every level, he doesn't mean just the crowns and the vowels and the trope markings, but every level on which we study Torah, right, helps us reach to deeper and higher levels. They are great mysteries which are hidden and concealed, which no creature can comprehend. When one studies Torah with this awareness and with intention toward this inner experience, and with the complete faith that every word of Torah she has studied is full of mysteries and secrets. This is my translation. He said he, I made it she. But with the complete faith that every word of Torah that she has studied is full of mysteries and secrets, and thus connects the Torah she is studying with the Torah that exists in the supernal realms, this is Kvod HaTorah. This is the honor of Torah. Okay, so this is a very different sort of reading. At first glance, you might say, whoa, that's some mystical wackiness, right? That feels heavy. What does that have to do with Kvod HaTorah? But I'd invite us to sit with this for a second, right, and hold it, because he's gonna point out through the inverse what happens. But he's saying, if we encounter Torah with a sense of there is depth here, there is meaning here, this can take us to deep and beautiful, meaningful places, right? If we deposit that emunah, that kavod, that honor to the Torah, that's going to come back to us. So he goes on with his commentary. This one will likewise be honored among people. That is their body. And here he's making a particular reading, a very fine reading on the text itself, because what did it say? Gufo mechubar ala Torah. So ala briot, which we translated as they themselves will be honored, and that's probably the right translation, but a literal translation of the word guf is their body. Their body will be honored. What does that mean here? So he says, in Hasidic fashion, their body will be connected by means of their soul upwards to Ein Sof. You will have an embodied experience. You feel it. We feel it when we're learning Torah and we're really connected. It's not just an intellectual exercise. We feel full. We should feel it in our bodies. We should feel it in our hearts. We should feel it in all parts of our bodies. We should feel deeper, lighter, however you feel, right? Alive. And the light of their soul will illuminate their body. Okay? So the next time you go on your Peloton, you can think about we're gonna get there. We're gonna get like, you know, some like IJS Peloton ride. I know it's coming. I'm gonna get John Silver on the Peloton one of these days. All right, anyway. And one who desecrates the Torah. So similarly, then he takes it home, right? He's gonna bring it home. That is, so Michalel, again, he's gonna make a wordplay. Desecrate here is Michalel, right? Michalel et Torah, one who desecrates or dishonors the Torah. So that is who makes the Torah hollow, chalul, as in, which is also related to chol, which makes it, you know, it can be a hole, right? Someone who makes it hollow, you hollow it out, drained of vitality, and simply a book of stories, not filled with mysteries and depths. This is just a book of stories. It's nice stories. So if you do that and you hollow it out, you drain it out of its meaning, that's being mechalel et Torah. That is dishonoring the Torah. In this one's thought, there is no inner life to the Torah. To this one, the Torah is like a body without a soul. And thus, this one does not draw forth the inner vitality, the soulful depths we have discussed above into it. And thus, this one's own physical body is likewise hollow. That is, they are made hollow as they have detached their soul. A little harsh, but it's in service of his point, right? We can, that when we don't have that embodied experience, when we don't invest our learning of Torah with the sense that we're really honoring this text, right? And that there is meaning to be learned here, and there is relationship to be developed with ourselves, with the divine, with the other learners and readers who we are part of, the community we're part of right now, and the community that goes, you know, that extends outward through time and space. When we don't have that, we don't have that sense of aliveness in our own body, right? We don't draw forth the inner vitality, and thus our own physical body is likewise hollow. We're depriving ourselves of of the possibility of that experience. So this is a very different, like this is a Hasidic reading, right? And you got to like read that with a understanding what, you know, Hasidut is trying to do. But I think there's so much, it's such a powerful reading of this, right? This isn't a technical thing. And Kavod HaTorah is not, you know, does this action qualify as Kavod HaTorah or Chilul HaTorah? No, he's saying it's our encounter with Torah. How are we approaching our encounter with Torah? How are we investing that? I once heard, years ago, I heard Moshe Halbertal give a wonderful definition of what canonical text. He has a book called People of the Book, and he gave a definition of what's a canonical text. And a canonical text, he said, is one where when I have a gap in my understanding, a gap between what I read and what I understand, my first instinct is not to say there's something wrong with the text. My first instinct is to say, I probably need to figure out, like, what is the text trying to say, right? What is it? It's investing it with, it's not coming at it with saying, what's wrong with this? But it's saying, how do I need to adjust myself to understand what it's trying to say, right? And I've carried that, I probably heard that 25 years ago, and I've carried it with me for a long time, because I think in terms of the stance that it embodies, I think it's something similar here to what the Avodat Yisrael is saying. We honor the Torah in believing or in coming to it, that this is a source of relationship. It's a vehicle for relationship with each other, with the divine, with ourselves. And in that is how we build then this field of dignity through it. Imagine if, you know, we honored everybody who's learning Torah, everybody who's living Torah. If I approach it that way, if I approach it, you know, it's another teaching in Pirkei Avot. Havei dan kol adam l'kav zchut. Give everyone the benefit of the doubt, meaning I approach everybody with a generous spirit. I approach everybody with a sense that this person has kavod. This person has something that I can learn from. This person, and I'm rooting for this person. I want this person to be a model of Torah, and I want to be a model of Torah. What if we all lived our lives that way? Be amazing, right? Like what a community that would be. I want to, I know we're Dave, tell me what time are we, remind me what time we're aiming to finish here. Is it a quarter after, half past?
We haven't until half past.
Okay, great. So let me open it. Let me pause there for any comments or questions. If you can put them in the chat, that would be great. Just it gives people a little more chance. So I'd love to hear that. But I also see I think another hand up. Misha, you have your hand up again. Did you want to make another comment?
Well, I noticed that you commented on that it seemed kind of out there, but one of the things that one of the gifts I think from, if we kind of think of it as if we cut ourselves off, we die. We're introduced in Bereshit, right? We're in the garden and we are separated from it. And so I am a data scientist, and anyways, when we hug trees, you have to breathe in, though, you have to hug them. There's actually an exchange that happens, and it helps reduce inflammation in your body. I'm not going to do a whole lesson on this, but there is a symbiosis that our bodies have that we're just beginning to understand in science, just like we are beginning to understand some things around the halakha of keeping kosher that really help our bodies. There are all kinds of things, from fasting to halakha. And so I think that I really liked when you said that there are things that we don't know that are yet to be discovered. And so when you talked about the 4 parts of the body, I really believe that Judaism has all of those things there for us, and that honoring has to recognize all the planes, right? That we can't just recognize the text, we can't just recognize the neshama. We have to exist in kind of these different planes. And so I just wanted to point that out, because in the Torah we do talk about trees, and we're removed from trees, and then we don't live as long. And so there are science is showing us that there are things that happen when we are separated from trees. And so I think they're all the parts.
Thank you. Thank you. Tony's a great comment. Doesn't honoring Torah in many ways include treating people who don't themselves honor Torah with dignity and honor as created b'tselem Elohim, in God's image, right? So that's a yes. I mean, right? That's a great question. And what do we do with people who don't honor Torah, right? And what's our approach to that? And I'm not sure that the Mishnah here is prescriptive about that. Like, that's where I choose to read the Mishnah as basically being descriptive. It's just saying, look, if you want to have a community where Kvod HaTorah is a value, you got to live your life as, living it through Kvod HaTorah. If you don't do that, you're not gonna have that community. You're not gonna have that life. And there is the other thing I would just say before we get to the final point here is also, I've been thinking a lot in recent years about the concept of honor. I mentioned before I was a Boy Scout, and it's an experience that my father was our scoutmaster, and my grandfather, my father, my older brothers were all Eagle Scouts, and I've been thinking a lot in recent years, as I've been watching political life in particular, thinking about honor and what is honor, right? And where does that come from? And the notion that someone has a personal sense of honor and integrity, right? We sort of, in a certain sense, taken that for granted, right? If you have a sense of honor and integrity, there are certain things you won't do, not because there's lo amanat lekabel pras, Harry, right? Not because I want to receive any reward, but just because, like, it's not the right thing, right? Like, and that's deeply embedded in me. And there is and where does that come from? It's education, it's upbringing, it's modeling, it's all sorts of things. And that's entirely the point, is, you have to have a culture. What comes first? You need honorable people to raise honorable people, and if you have dishonorable people, you're probably going to have dishonorable people. And where's the point of intervention, right? And I think what the Mishnah is saying here again is like, it's not, to answer your question, I don't think it's, that there's a prize here to be honored. It's saying if we want to have a culture of dignity and honor, we have to have a culture of dignity and honor. We have to live that way. It's up to us, right? And that's a virtuous, and he's describing both a virtuous and a vicious circle. The virtuous circle is the more honor for Torah, the more honor that comes into people. The vicious circle is the less honor for Torah, the less honor for people, possibly. There's another comment here. This is a broader question and not meant to be snarky, but is it possible, I think it is, to read or approach other wonderful texts, other spiritual writing the same way? I speak also as literature. Absolutely, I would say yes. Right? It's we can have a very capacious, wide view of what we need. Torah.
But I mean, I really didn't. I meant that seriously, because I think that this is not to denigrate Torah. It's just to say that maybe the way in which we should ideally read Torah is the way we should ideally approach certain other things too. Because it's transformative for us. I love what you have been saying, by the way, Rabbi Feigelson. I just think this has been great. I spend my whole, God knows how many years teaching, and what you were saying so hit home for me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, look, I came, as Dave mentioned before, in the introduction, I spent most of my career before coming to the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and Higher Education. And, and one of the things that my friend, Ibu Patel, you should read his new book. He's got a good new book out, the name of which is escaping me right now. But one of the things that Ibu and I he's worked in higher ed for a long time, that we've talked about is, he pointed out to me, is that, liberal education, you can say, kind of consists of two questions, right? What's here and what's not here. There's an appreciative move and there's a critical move. And sadly, a lot of what's happened is that the critical has kind of eaten up the appreciative, right? It's very hard to ask what is here. We've become so focused on what's not. And that's not, that's in all directions politically, right? I'm not singling anybody out for that. It's just become a real toxic piece of our culture. And I think there is a piece here about that educators can identify with, of like, hold on a second, create some mental or spiritual space before we jump into criticizing and critiquing and saying everything that's not here. Let's look at what is here for a minute, right? And what can be learned? What can we learn from this? And that is a certain, there's honor that is from that, and that's a move, whether we're talking about Torah or we're talking about literature or whatever we're talking. So let me just shift into a final thought, right? Which is, I previewed at the beginning, which was to say another way of translating the word kavod is also as dignity, right? So one who treats the Torah with dignity is themselves dignified. Right, one who dignifies Torah. And I don't know, this is a really genuine question. I don't know that there's a meaningful difference between honor and dignity, but they hit different registers. And there probably is something to be mined from that, I'm sure. But I just wanted to bring in a dignity related take on this, which would be it's a lovely book by a woman named Donna Hicks, Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People. This is a leadership book published by Yale Press, not known for their leadership books. But it's a beautiful approach. She came out of peace building work, doing a lot of mediation in Northern Ireland, and then has turned that into a consulting practice and teaching around mediation and conflict resolution and peace building. And for her, what she identifies, and I think a lot of political commentary today would probably recognize this, would agree with this, is so many of the things that we're confronting are about people's violated sense of dignity, that we have an inherent sense of dignity, and then when that's violated, whether we're talking about in the workplace, whether we're talking about in political life, that real trouble can ensue from that. So she's trying to turn that around, and she's writing to business leaders and other leaders of like, how do we build cultures, create cultures that bring out that honor dignity. So she says the wounds we inflict on one another during a breakdown of a relationship are not only painful, but also often humiliating. Whoever said sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me got it wrong. Words can be used as weapons to psychologically annihilate people's dignity, their sense of value and worth. It's like aiming for the heart when you want to physically destroy someone. Words that take aim at dignity can inflict pain that is devastating. But unlike a physical injury, there are no broken bones, no blood, no obvious sign of a wound. The pain that results from interactions that violate dignity remain invisible, causing people to suffer silently. The emotional volatility of having our dignity honored or violated cannot be overstated. When people feel that their value and worth are recognized in their relationships, they experience a sense of well-being that enables them to grow and flourish. If, by contrast, their dignity is routinely injured, relationships are experienced as a source of pain and suffering. So take this back now to what we've been thinking about in terms of one who honors Torah is themselves honored, and with the Hasidic understanding of that, that's also in your body. And now let's reread that last paragraph. When people or Torah feel that their value and worth are recognized in their relationships, they experience a sense of well-being that enables them to grow and flourish, right? That their value and worth are recognized in their relationships. So we have to invest that. It's also, I mean, I want to say the flip side of this, you've seen me do it. I called it out for a minute. When people don't see themselves reflected, when all of the stuff is written to men, right? When it's not inclusive, we need to also make efforts to include and allow people to see themselves, right? Invite people to see themselves reflected. That's also really, really important. And that's one of the beauties of Torah, is that it is elastic in that way. We can do that, right? We can expand it. Because we're here and we're learning it, and it's a living, right? It's a living text. So it's a living tree. So when people feel that their value and worth are recognized in their relationships, they experience a sense of well-being that enables them to grow and flourish. They experience that in their bodies, not just in their minds, right? But they feel in their emotions, in their bodies. If by contrast, their dignity is routinely injured, kol hamechalel et haTorah, right? Relationships are experienced as a source of pain and suffering. They're hollowed out, right? So if we're constantly, if we're not honoring Torah, if we're not building a culture of dignity, of Torah and of people, which are one and the same, right? They are related, they're tied together, they're braided together, then we don't have the community we're looking for. So, there may be some value here in bringing this in, just in thinking about dignity as another way of another angle, another cut on honor, right? Honor can sometimes seem a little highfalutin and and remote, but dignity, I think, is something that all of us experience. That's something that is front of mind, front of experience. I think all the time we're aware of it. So I'd invite you to think about that. That's all I got. If there are additional questions or reflections, I would love to, we have a few more minutes that we're here, and I would love to see them in the chat if you want to share. And this has been a real delight to be able to, it's a great opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to think about this, because I wouldn't have thought about this in this way were it not for the invitation. Tony, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just had a question earlier. There's literal Torah, and then there's kind of metaphorical Torah. And sometimes they could conflict. And when we're talking about honoring the Torah, I know that there are people who believe if you honor implied Torah for well-behaved, or well behavior, good behavior, that would conflict sometimes with literal Torah, and then that would be dishonoring that. How do you work through those tensions? Well, never
Great
mind.
question. No, it's a fabulous question. It's a fabulous question. I'm sitting with it because it's a hard question.
I mean, I think those of us who are not ultra orthodox probably work more with metaphorical Torah. I think.
Well, so I would say a couple of things. First of all, as one of my teachers said many years ago, Jews don't read the Bible. Jews read the Bible the way the rabbis read the Bible. Which means, right, we're not Protestants. If you want Protestantism, that's great, wonderful tradition. You can go and have a direct, unmediated relationship with the text. But the way we read the text, we have Rashi over here, we've got the Ramban over here, and we've got this commentary and that commentary, we've got us, right? So, and from the very beginning, we just had one of these last week in our parsha. We had ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, regel tachat regel, right? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And what do we know? That we know from very, very early on that we did not interpret that literally, right? We interpreted that as you pay monetary damages for the eye and you pay monetary damages for the tooth. And so the beauty of one of the great beauties of the tradition of Torah that we inherit is precisely the fact of interpretation. That it's not just the text, that it is an Eitz Chaim, it is this eternal conversation that we have the privilege of entering into, right, and being inheritors of. So when you say literal and metaphorical Torah, like there's a part of me that wants to say, and what's literal Torah? Right? Like, I'm not so sure. The very first word of the Torah, Bereshit, you've already got like 15 different interpretations of what that word even means. So, so I'm not sure it's quite as big a problem as it might be made out to be. And we shouldn't, we also don't want to skirt, like, there are plain meanings, but also plain meanings change. What was the plain meaning in one time might not have been, might not be the plain meaning today. And so meaning is always negotiated. It is, yeah. And so maybe my response, Tony, would be like, I wouldn't undersell it. I wouldn't say, I might push back and say, I'm not sure there's a literal and a metaphorical Torah. I think that there are readings of, there are plain readings of text. There are multi-layered readings of text, but and the proof is always in the pudding. Like, I like to say that studying Torah to me is like a game of tetherball that you might have played as a kid, right? Where you got the pole and you got the ball, and if you don't have any give in the if the ball is just up against the pole and there's no tension in the rope, there's no game, right? It's just a literal reading. There's nothing interesting. Okay, there's no game going on. And if I take a pair of scissors and I cut the rope, and now I just got a ball sitting on the ground and a pole, I also have no game, right? It's cut off. The interesting stuff, the game happens when there's tension in the rope, right? Between me, the reader, and the pole, the text. And it's even better when there's two people, because if you're just playing by yourself, it's kind of boring. So I think that there's, that's a long response to your question, but I think that I think we're always reading. I think the question that we need to come to our readings with is this reading honoring the Torah, or is it dishonoring the Torah? Like, where am I coming from with this? Am I trying to attack? Am I trying to subvert? Like, what am I trying to do here? Or am I trying to open up and trying to honor and there's some discernment that can often be involved in that.
Okay, so I would say your answer then is a metaphorical kind of reading. I'm thinking of things like, if you're rude to your parents, you're put to death. That's very literal. That couldn't.
Sure.
That's very simple.
Yep.
And I don't believe that that's something we would do nowadays. So my question may not have been worded as well as to get the answer I hoped, but I would say that a literal meaning was, you're rude to your parents, you're put to death. A metaphorical reading would be an interpretation of that.
and again, though, I would say, Tony, and the rabbis in the Talmud already 2,000 years ago agreed with you, right? So the question is, where do you draw the line on
Exactly.
like literal reading, right? And
that was my question.
Yeah,
is that slippery?
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard, but
Right.
but it's why we don't give up, but we don't give up on the Torah. I mean, or you do, right? but if you want to stay in the game, then you find ways of working with it and coming up with new ways of understanding and learning from.
Right. Well, then that's answering the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I get it.
All right. You're welcome. All right. I think we're at our time. Dave, this has been so great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been such a treat, and we'll echo one of the comments in the chat that has been a seriously wonderful conversation. So before we close, just for everyone who's joining us, if you still got ideas on your mind and in your heart, there are a lot of ways that we're going to continue engaging on this topic. Tomorrow morning, join us for meditation right after morning minyan, where we'll be meditating on these themes with Rabbi Shuli Passo. And of course, there's our virtual community journal, where we want everyone to add your voice, sharing video or audio or plain text as we go deeper into these ideas. And this week asking, how do we honor Torah in our relationships with one another? What is the Torah of our community? And what does a community that truly honors Torah look like? What a great foundation tonight for digging into that. But we do want to hear your voice. So I'm throwing into the chat right now the link for our virtual community journal, and I want to invite everyone just to click it so you've got it open in your browser, even if you don't want to go there right now after we finish. A few other things just to say as we look towards next week, when we're going to be exploring how we hold sacred disagreement, machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven. So join us next Tuesday, where we'll be learning with Dr. Marjorie Lehman from Jewish Theological Seminary. And one other announcement as we look towards next week, we're excited to be releasing playlists for each of these final weeks with music inspired by the themes of our study, curated especially for this project by Hadar's Rising Song Institute. So we're really excited to share these as another way of exploring these concepts and exploring more thinking for our virtual community journal and ultimately BJ's community covenant. So since we on the East Coast at least now have an opportunity to say the Omer together at this point in the night, I want to invite everyone to do that together. If you were joining us right from evening minyan and you've got Siddur Sim Shalom still handy, we're on page 237 in Siddur Sim Shalom, and tonight we're counting the 32nd day of the Omer. Page 237. הנני מוכן ומזומן לקיים
מצוות עשה של ספירת העומר.
כמו שכתוב בתורה.
שכתוב בתורה, ספרתם לכם ממחרת השבת ביום מביאכם את העומר התנובה. 7 שבתות תמימות תהיינה עד ממחרת השבת השביעית, תספרו 50 יום.
אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו על ספירת העומר. היום 32 יום, שהם 4 שבועות ו4 ימים לעומר. Thank you again, Rabbi Josh Feigelson. Thank you to everyone who is with us tonight. And I hope to see you all very soon.